or sunny spells and a few scattered showers. And that continues through Thursday evening and into Thursday night as well. A few showers lingering, quite a lot of cloud around, still fairly breezy, and yet another batch of showery rains begins to push in from the west. So remaining very changeable and unsettled over the next few days. But again, look at those overnight temperatures, more like the sort of temperatures we would expect by day at this stage of October. So for Friday, a pretty wet and windy day, especially for western and northern parts of the country. Some very heavy bursts of rain at times, especially across parts of Scotland. And elsewhere, a mixture of bright spells and a few showers. And that story continues through the weekend, with temperatures remaining above average. Bye for now.
Tonight on Farage, Rishi Sunak's first performance at Prime Minister's Questions, and gosh, he actually was much stronger than I thought he would be. But he's decided to reintroduce the ban on fracking. Is Rishi right to ban fracking? We will debate and discuss that tonight here on this programme. We'll also go to Manston, which is currently holding double the number of people that across the English Channel that it's supposed potentially a very dangerous situation. What on earth can be done? And joining me on Talking Pints, Gerard Lyons. He was formerly economic advisor to Boris Johnson and recently gave Liz Truss some advice that she would have done very well to listen to. All of that coming up in a moment. First, let's get the news.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening. The top story. Rishi Sunak has vowed to rebuild public finances in a way that's fair and compassionate. In his first Prime Minister's questions, Mr Sunak promised to protect the most vulnerable as he addressed what he called the mistakes of his predecessor, Liz Truss. Well, the House of Commons debate today was dominated, though, by the reappointment of the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. She reportedly breached the ministerial code last week and then resigned. The Prime Minister defended his decision in his opening speech, while the Labour leader questioned it.
The Secretary made an error of judgment, but she recognised that. She raised the matter and she accepted her mistake. And that's why I was delighted to welcome back into a united cabinet that brings experience and stability to the heart of government.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and promised integrity, professionalism and accountability. But then, with his first act, he appointed a Home Secretary who was sacked by his predecessor.
Well, meanwhile, the Chancellor has delayed the announcement of the government's economic plan by 2 weeks, moving it to the 17th of November. Jeremy Hunt says the medium-term plan, which was due to be announced next Monday, will be upgraded now to an autumn statement, taking into account the latest forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility. Mr Hunt says he's already demonstrated he's willing to make choices that are politically embarrassing if they're in the national interest.
Now we have a new Prime Minister and the prospect of much longer-term stability for the economy in the country. And in that context, a short 2.5-week delay is the best way we will make sure that it is the right decisions we take.
As you were hearing in Nigel's introduction, in another U-turn on Liz Truss's policies, the new Prime Minister confirmed he'll be reinstating the ban on fracking in England. Rishi Sunak telling the Commons today he stands by the Conservative 29 manifesto pledge to ban drilling for shale gas. In other news today, 2 members of a grooming gang operating in Rochdale 10 years ago have lost an appeal against deportation back to Pakistan. Adil Khan and Kari Abdul Rauf were all convicted on a series of sex offences against young girls in 2012. Both have fought a legal battle to stay on in the UK on the grounds of their human rights. But immigration judges ruled the 2 men be deported for the public good, saying Khan had shown a breathtaking lack of remorse. And GB News has been told the authorities fear a migrant processing centre in Kent could erupt into serious disorder due to the living conditions inside. The RAF facility near Ramsgate is reportedly overcrowded, with some migrants spending far longer there than they would normally take to process. Fights and assaults on staff are a regular occurrence at the base, along with outbreaks of illness. There were 7 security incidents, we're told, last night alone. An independent inspector is quoted as saying he was left speechless by the conditions inside. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel, where now it's time to go back to Farage.
Good evening. Now, I thought to myself, we've got Rishi Sunak, who on Monday night, after it was announced he was the only candidate left in the race, read from an autocue. He was like a robot. And then we've got Keir Starmer on the other side, who may be very well educated and professionally very successful and eloquent in his own way. But I thought it's going to be so dull with these two because Boris, love him or hate him, always made things quite exciting. Well, at this first PMQs between the two, and effectively they're now both auditioning to be the next Prime Minister, I think they'll both lead their parties into the next general election, although after the last few weeks, who's to say? But I have to say, this first PMQs between the two of them really was knockout stuff. Sunak was great. He was very, very strong. His delivery was confident. And I have to say, Starmer did pretty well too. If it was a boxing bout on points, no question, in my mind, that Sunak wins. He did well. But on policy, how well did he do? Well, the first thing that I noticed him saying very, very clearly was his continued commitment to renewable energy. Have a look at this.
When it comes to energy policy, I stick by what we said in our manifesto, Mr. Speaker. The important thing is, though, to focus on our long-term energy security. That means more renewables, more offshore wind, and indeed more nuclear. That's what this government will deliver.
There we are. We're going to have more offshore wind. We're going to have some onshore wind, and we're going to have nuclear, just that it won't deliver for at least 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, or whatever it may be. So I began to ask myself, what of the concept of energy independence, perhaps even becoming an energy exporter? Well, shortly after that, the one Green MP in Parliament, and gosh, doesn't she seem to get called an awful lot, given they've only got one MP, but Caroline Lucas was up, and just take a listen to this.
Yesterday, he promised to fix her mistakes as well as to uphold the party's 2019 manifesto. So if he is a man of his word, will he start by reversing the green light she gave to fracking, since it's categorically not been shown to be safe, and instead maintain the moratorium that was pledged in that very manifesto that he has promised to uphold?
Well, I've already said I stand by the manifesto on that. And I can give the Honourable Lady my commitment that we will deliver on all those ambitions. We will deliver on what we said at COP, because we care deeply about passing our children an environment in better state than we found it ourselves.
So that means the fracking ban is back. We will not be producing onshore gas under this Rishi Sunak Conservative government. We will not become energy independent. No, we'll keep our fingers crossed that we don't get cold winters and the lights don't go out. And whilst it's true to say that the price of gas has come down, my biggest concern always has been about the reliability of supply. I think this is a very, very big mistake. We're living in a different world to 2019, to when that manifesto was put to the British public. But you tell me, what do you think? Is Rishi right to ban fracking? Let me know. Farage at gbnews.uk. And if you want to come and debate this and all the other big issues of the day, and how you see the new Prime Minister against the Labour Party, we will be tomorrow's night, GB News, the People's Forum. Michelle and I will be there broadcasting live from 6 to 8 p.m. in Uxbridge. We did the first one last week in Deal. If you want to come along, there are a few tickets left, not very many. Go to gbnews.uk. Come along, have your say on the telly and on the radio. Well, joining me now is a Conservative Member of Parliament for Thirsk and Malton, Kevin Hollinrake. And Kevin, you're one of those MPs, you know the Russian-funded campaign against onshore gas extraction was very effective. People were terrified of earthquakes and goodness knows what else. And yet you, despite some of your constituents having fears, all the way through, as I read it, you've wanted us to be energy independent.
Absolutely right. And what I don't agree with you on, and we both agree on energy independence, but what Rishi said today is not about scrapping that desire to get to energy independence. Rishi's already set out, he wants that by 2045, progressively.
I'm sorry, just say that again. What year?
2045.
What use is that to us?
But we're not sort of magically going to go to it in 2045. Progressively, over time, you've got to be realistic, Nigel. We just talked earlier about over-promising, underperforming. Yes. You've got to be realistic. The difficulty with fracking, and I've been to Pennsylvania, looked at this in the US, I am pro-fracking. But the difficulty in terms of solving today's problems, even tomorrow's problems, it's very slow rollout. That's the reality. It's taken the USA 4 or 5 decades to get there. The mix, you're absolutely right, the mix needs to include gas and oil, it's particularly when we get to carbon capture and storage, and nuclear, and offshore wind, and onshore wind, and hydrogen, a mix of solutions. But it's easy to get the gas and the oil, and less politically politically controversial to get it from the North Sea than it is onshore. And there are inherent problems with fracking. It takes time. There are some seismicity issues. There's no guarantee that would be the solution. I think Rishi's solution is more pragmatic and more realistic.
And when the lights go out, what do you say to your constituents?
Well, that's exactly why we need to set that agenda out to get to energy independence as quickly as possible.
But Kevin, come on. You know, we're here in 2022.
But your solution won't get us there any quicker, Nigel.
I mean, a lot of us won't still be here in 2045.
No, we should have started years ago, shouldn't we? We absolutely should.
Well, certainly with nuclear, yes, we should have started many years ago. There's no question about that. That gives us baseload power, and we know that. We've gone hell for leather for wind energy. Boris Johnson particularly, we're going to become the Saudi Arabia of wind. I have to say, I'm pretty appalled that we've lumped subsidies onto the electricity bills of the poor to give these giant companies all this money. But hey, there we are, we've done it. But we have to have gas. We have to have gas as the backup for that.
I agree.
Now, if we were to start onshore gas exploration, it is a reasonable expectation that within 2 to 2.5 years, we would have a good supply of our own gas. And this Prime Minister, and I know you support him, and I'm sure you agree with me that he was very strong.
Absolutely.
At the dispatch box. And he was in many ways. But this Prime Minister has turned his back on what Liz Truss said we'd do.
It's got to be politically realistic. If you're going to do it, if you're going to do it in 2 and 2.5 years, you're going to have to completely scrap the planning system that exists today. Now, you may say we should do that, so we roll out fracking everywhere without any democratic accountability. That's not what Liz Truss was going to do. It was all local referenda. That would have been a nightmare. You would not have got fracking through that way. So Liz might have had some great grand promises in terms of fracking, but they would have not delivered a solution. The way they did it in the USA is people have no say. So the regulator comes along and says, a fracking site's going there and there and there. Politically, you would not get it through. You wouldn't get through the House of Commons. I'm sorry, you won't. Be pragmatic.
We're 12
get it out
years.
of the North Sea.
We're 12 years. Well, I mean, I just care that we get it, all right?
Yes, I do too.
We're 12 years into a Conservative government. Do you accept that on this key issue of energy, they failed the country completely?
We should have done more earlier, of course, but with the benefit of everything's easy with the benefit of hindsight. I was arguing for fracking in 2015. You know, I think it would have the right thing to do then. We should have been investing in nuclear back in 2010 when Nick Clegg ruled it out, if you remember. He said it would take until 2022 to bring it online, and we could have had it now. But we are where we find ourselves. So let's make the right decisions now. Invest in onshore wind, offshore wind, nuclear, North Sea exploration, hydrogen, just as we are doing now. Ramp up that investment more quickly because we know what an imperative it is.
Well, Kevin, I know you're pro-fracking, but I'm afraid your boss isn't, and that's where we are. Thank you for coming in and joining us. Now, the very strongest part, I thought, of the delivery that we saw today from the new Prime Minister was on the whole issue of law and order, of illegal immigration, and indeed legal immigration. Just listen to this answer to Sir Keir Starmer.
What the Home Secretary will be focused on. She'll be focused on cracking down on criminals, on defending our borders, while the party opposite remains soft on crime and in favour of unlimited immigration.
Well, there we are. Dan Hodges joins me, Mail on Sunday columnist. I mean, this was tub-thumping, right-wing stuff, cracking down on law and order. You lot over there would let anybody in. We're going to control our borders. He's making this a real centrepiece of what he stands for, isn't he?
Well, he did in that answer. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, I watched it. I saw that answer. I thought, to be frankly, I thought I was looking at Nigel Farage in the dispatch box there. But then I saw another couple of answers, and I thought Ed Miliband was standing there. So you know, he was mixing it up a bit. No, I mean, it was. I mean, I think the key thing is, I mean, I think everybody was impressed. I mean, at how confident he was in his first political outing, and I think in terms of the politics, obviously he was responding to a question about Suella Braverman. Who he has appointed to his cabinet. I mean, I think we all know why. He's talked about unity. Suella Braverman was his offer to the right of his party. But equally, I think if you look across the board, I think that this is a government now in which is a slightly moved away from the broadly the political positioning that we've seen we saw with Boris, we saw with Liz, and is a government that is basically going to say, look, next 2 years we've only got one chance, and that is to calm things down, no more psychodramas, and we need to
deliver. Unity within the party is going to be a big theme with him.
Yeah, obviously unity, and I think, look, I think unite
or die. He said.
Unite or die, he said, and I think, look, the reality is Suella Braverman is not in the government because Rishi Sunak thinks she is the most going to be one of the stars of his government. Suella Braverman is in the government because she took the political calculation at a crucial point in the sort of the very sort of concentrated leadership election. She came out for Rishi against Boris, brought sections of the right sort of to his coalition, and that's why she's there. But I don't think he necessarily thinks she is indicative of the direction his government is going to be.
It's interesting because Priti Patel, right from the very beginning, from August 2019, Priti Patel overpromised and underdelivered on what would happen in the English Channel, what would happen with overall net migration figures. Is there a danger then that with Suella in place, they make the same mistake again? They promise they're going to do great things, they're going to solve the problem, and don't do it, and pay, in the Red Wall particularly, a big electoral price?
Well, if I was being cynical, I would say, who is the danger for? Is the danger for Rishi Sunak, or is the danger for Suella Braverman? I mean, Suella Braverman has come in, she's accepted the role of Home Secretary, Rishi has given her the role of Home Secretary. She's now got to deliver, and it is now Suella Braverman who has to come up with the practical solution to the migrant crisis. Now, if she doesn't deliver, who's that going to be on? Is that going to be on Rishi Sunak, or is that going to be on Suella Braverman?
I think it might be on the Conservative Party at the next general election. It's very interesting. The further you go away from Dover, the bigger the issue becomes, because it's in the northwest, it's in the northeast, where these hotels are filling up in seaside towns at a rate that is almost unimaginable. People are seeing the impact of this. They're not liking it, and they're saying, you know what, we voted Brexit to get back control of our borders, and that's now being made a mockery of.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I have to say I can understand why you might be sort of slightly cynical about the Conservative Party's ability to deliver on this, and why you may be setting them up for a fall. I mean, the one thing I would say is I completely understand what you're saying about the importance of immigration as an issue. I do think, though, the one thing that has happened as a result of Liz Truss's let's be honest, sort of slightly disastrous premiership is it's reset the political prism and the view through which we see politics. Rishi Sunak thinks there is only one game in town, which is the economy. Now, he thinks that is what is going to determine whether or not he loses the next election. He's got Suella Braverman in. He said to Suella Braverman and the right of the party, OK, you think this is a big issue. You think immigration is a big issue. You've told me, right, you show me you can fix it. If she can't fix it, he's going to say, well, you had your chance.
All right. Final thought. You've covered this circus of Westminster as it's been.
Yeah.
Did we today look at the two people who will lead their parties into the next general election?
I think so. Do you know the one weird thing, just the one weird thing? Rishi Sunak was very, very impressive today. If we're in a year's time, and Rishi Sunak has somehow managed to close the gap, let's just see what Labour MPs are saying about Keir Starmer.
Oh gosh, there we are. There we are. The circus can move to the other side of the house. Dan Hodges, as ever, a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining us here on GB News. In a moment, we go to Manston in Kent, the holding centre for those that are coming into Dover. At the moment, it's running at double capacity. There are red alert warnings that something very bad could happen there soon. So was Rishi right to ban fracking? Some of your reactions coming in. One viewer says, one Green MP persuaded a PM. He's a weak fool. Now, I'm not sure she persuaded him, but she certainly prompted him. Marvin says, no, very wrong. Another says, no, but expected no different. He is a globalist, and that word will come up later in this programme, and will do everything he can to prevent us an independent country. That's very strong stuff. Stuart says, following Biden's policy of shooting yourself in the foot. This whole issue of energy independence is one, I think, where the British public are so far away from the majority view at Westminster that it's just not true. Now, another issue where there are very strong passions on both sides, but again, a clear majority of people from across the spectrum are worried, concerned, some even frightened about the illegal cross-channel trade that is going on. Over 38,000 people have arrived so far this year. And the first place they generally go to is the old Royal Air Force Base at Manston in Kent. Now, Mark White, GB News' home editor, has been to Manston today and produced this very disturbing report.
Within this air base, the main processing centre for Channel migrants, there is, we've been told, a powder keg atmosphere. Many more here than authorities intended, leading to regular outbreaks of violence between residents and assaults on staff. Some of those at Manston Air Base have told us they fear it may only be a matter of time before there is serious disorder here. Concerns backed up by the independent Chief Inspector of Borders, who visited the base on Monday.
There is of the order of nearly 2,500 people who were being guarded by non-trained detainee custody officers. So they're being guarded by a mixture of immigration enforcement officers and security guards. It was sufficiently alarming when I discovered that. I was frankly speechless.
The Manston Processing Centre was designed to hold no more than 1,500 people for just a few days at a time. There is double that number here now. Many have been here for weeks. I've been told that on Monday night alone there were 7 separate security incidents here. Adding to the tensions is a change in the demographics of those arriving. Most are Albanians. Few, if any, would ever qualify for asylum. And the vast majority certainly don't want to be here in the first place. It's why we've seen incidents like this at the weekend, where 80 people on 2 boats landed on this beach in Dover and immediately ran off.
A lot of them are not actually interested in seeing their asylum claim through. They just want to get through it as far as they can. We'll typically put them in a hotel for a couple of days and then they'll disappear. They'll work illegally in the UK for maybe 6 months, maybe a year, send the money home, and then they'll go back to Albania.
Sources have told us the Albanian factor is a key driver for much of the increase in tensions at Manston.
I'm afraid this particular cohort does have amongst it more dangerous criminal elements that we have to deal with. It's really important that we have the resources and the time to properly screen them to make sure there aren't any criminals or previous deportees or worse amongst them.
Authorities have confirmed that of the 38,000 who've arrived across the Channel so far this year, 12,000 are Albanian. The Home Office acknowledges it's causing unprecedented strain on the asylum system. It is without doubt the most pressing issue facing the new Home Secretary. Mark White, GB News at Manston Air Base in Kent.
Well, thanks to Mark White for that report. Now, one of the stories that comes up again and again and again is the police must stop the boats, and we keep giving tens and tens of millions more to the French to police their beaches. I've made the point repeatedly that they're taking off from across 70 miles of beach. There are vast amounts of sand dunes in which people can hide. It is difficult to stop those boats from leaving. But at that committee this morning, the boast was that 42.5% of those that attempt to leave French beaches in those dinghies are stopped. And that's chalked up to be a great victory. But it isn't. It makes no difference. Have a look at this video posted by an Albanian gang on TikTok. This shows an attempt to cross the channel on the 8th of October.
No!
What was the point? What was the point of stopping 50 of them if they're back the next day in a different boat and off they go towards the UK? To stop boats leaving those French beaches, I promise you, you would literally need tens of thousands of people to be there 24 hours a day. It does not work. Well, joining me to discuss this whole issue, Professor Michael Ben-Gad, Professor of Economics at City University, London. Michael, welcome to the programme. There are 38,000 that have come so far this year. But in the last couple of months, it's been a majority of those that have come from Albania. They can't possibly have any justifiable right to asylum status, can they?
Okay, well, thank you for having me on. I agree with you. In the past, you've had a big flow of Iranians, Syrians, people coming from Afghanistan, and many of them probably do have credible reasons for seeking political asylum. Even in those cases, it's often a mixture of motivations that cause people to want to come here. In the case of Albania, I mean, I would not describe Albania as a despotic hellhole. I think the Albanians who live here in London would be rather surprised by that kind of an argument. They're clearly economic migrants. Now, having said that, I don't wish to vilify them. A lot of them are probably coming here for economic opportunity. In fact, in some way, I admire them. I admire their gumption because Albania is a poor country and they want a better life in the United Kingdom. The question of whether the United Kingdom has an obligation to take them, that's a different story.
Yes, but just 1 second. You know, what we see every day on TikTok and elsewhere are Albanian gangs inviting young men to join criminality in the United Kingdom. We can't admire that, can we?
No, of course not. But as I said, I mean, there's a larger question. There are two really larger questions. Let's assume hypothetically that we're talking about asylum seekers, genuine asylum seekers who cross the English Channel. Even in that case, it's absolutely forbidden to send, according to international law, to send them back to their home countries. But it is not necessarily the case that the UK has to offer asylum. It is possible to send them to a third country or to send them back to France. France is perfectly safe. When you have economic migrants, I'm talking about people who are not criminals. Again, the UK is under no obligation to offer them a home. There is a legal migration route. These people, in some sense, are jumping the queue if all they are is economic migrants. In the case of Albanians, I cannot speak to how many of them or if any of them are really criminals. I have no way of knowing that.
I think it's pretty clear.
But I would venture to say that they are at very least economic migrants rather than people fleeing political persecution. And as a result, by any standard, they have absolutely no automatic right to live in the United Kingdom.
I think the point you're making is that we are under no legal obligation to accept people that come across the Channel from France, and yet we seem to be doing so. When Australia faced this problem, 10 years ago, they literally towed the boats back to Indonesia and the boats stopped coming. It's difficult to see the British government having that resolve, isn't it?
Well, I mean, there was an effort to send people to Rwanda. I would say that even in the case of asylum seekers, it is possible, bona fide asylum seekers, it is possible to send them to a third country. It was apparently very badly done, and Rwanda may not be the right choice. Again, I think you should bring on a legal expert, I'm not a legal expert, to sort of answer these questions about whether what is the obligation of the UK government? Because I can tell you, when you look at the debates in the legal literature, it's all over the place. A lot of this is based on legislation or agreements that were made in 1951. And none of those people anticipated a situation where people, I'm talking again about legitimate asylum seekers, would transit from one safe country to another in search of where they'd like to stay. Now, again, I don't fault them for that. If I were in their shoes, if I had to uproot myself and seek a new life, I'd go to the place where I thought I had the most economic opportunity. That's what they're here for. They're not here for welfare. They're here because they want to work, right? But again, it's not necessarily in Britain's interest to welcome everybody who chooses to come here.
Well, I've got to say, Professor Ben-Gad, you've given a very balanced view on the whole thing, and given that more often than not with this debate there's more heat and light, I thank you for doing so. And the point, I thought, that the Professor made there, that these rules that we're basing all this on were drafted back in 1951 in a very different world that could never have foreseen where we are today. I thought that was a very, very powerful and very, very strong point. Now, when Jeremy Hunt got appointed the other day, I was astonished because the International Monetary Fund, the Biden administration, the German Chancellor, all the big global organisations had been so critical of the attempt to reduce the size of the state and to cut taxes that suddenly Jeremy Hunt gets put in place. And to me, and I said it, I said, look, this is a globalist coup. And then Grant Shapps got put in as Home Secretary. I said, another globalist. And suddenly I'm being attacked and told you can't use the word globalist. I thought, what on earth are they on about? Well, I pick up today's Times, and a journalist called James Kirkup writes this piece in today's Times. He's got my picture there. And he says, Sunak must act fast to soothe populist rage. Basically, he's saying that the word populist is one that I've imported from America. You wouldn't know what the word was unless you delved deep into the internet, and it can have an anti-Semitic meaning. Well, I'm really sorry, Mr. Kirkup, but actually the A-level syllabus for sociology and for other subjects too includes the word globalist, includes the term globalism. We've been teaching this at A-level in this country for the last 10 years, and those watching on television can see those A-level teaching definitions and words. This is an attempt to stop us using an accurate word about what has happened in British government over the course of the last week or so. They want to bully us. They want to say, you can't use that word. That's anti-Semitic. Well, it isn't. It never was. And it certainly isn't in my case in any way at all. And I will not be bullied and cowed by The Guardian or The Times or anybody else, because what they want to do, they want to take us back into the European single market. That's what they want us to do. And they don't want us to use truthful terms about other politicians like Jeremy Hunt that want the same. Well, I won't be bullied, all right? In a moment, we're joined by a real independent economic thinker. He was, for many years, senior economic advisor to Boris Johnson. Recently, he was talking to Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng and giving them a warning about their mini-budget. Shame they didn't listen. In a moment, Talking Pints with Gerard Lyons. People's Forum this Thursday is coming to Uxbridge in West London. Yep, that's right, it's Boris Johnson's constituency. We want to find out, what do you think about Boris pulling out of the race? Do you think he'll hold the seat of Uxbridge? Will he even stand in Uxbridge? Is Rishi connecting with you? And what about Keir Starmer? If you want to come along, join the People's Forum, give us your view this Thursday evening. Please go to gbnews.uk. Well, we're back. It's Talking Pints, my favourite time of the day, and I'm joined by one of my very favourite economists. Yes, I really am. It's Gerard Lyons. Gerard, welcome.
Hi, good evening.
To the programme. Good to see you. Now, you are, these days, Chief Investment Strategist at Net Wealth. You have a host of other positions. You've been very well known in the investment world, banking and prediction world. You know,
that's right.
Top global predictor, Bloomberg said back in 2012. You saw the nonsense of ERM 30 years ago, but you also, interestingly, put up some flashing red lights before the 2008 financial collapse, the collapse that very famously the Queen said, did no one see this coming?
That's right.
What is it because of groupthink? Does everybody sort of like a herd all go in the same direction?
Yeah, well, 2008 was interesting. The month before that global financial crisis, I was one of only 2 UK economists saying that there would be a deep, imminent recession. But more generally, I was head of research at Standard Chartered. And even though we were a global organisation and not very much in the West, our macro views suggested there was about to be a global financial crisis. Difficult to predict exactly when. So Standard Chartered emerged as the second most capitalised bank in the world. So it was possible to be taking preventative action. I think the real problem is, as you say, often groupthink. People think the good times will continue and often don't think bad times will be able to hit you and you'll be able to prevent them. But the global financial crisis wasn't just a bad hit in itself. It also then led to what we've seen for the last 14 years, which has been a move to cheap money. And cheap money, which was the initial solution to the crisis and did put us back from a deep recession, unfortunately continued with low interest rates, central banks, including the Bank of England, printing money. And that's led to a whole host of problems. But avoiding groupthink is vitally important if you're an economist. Having a global as well as a domestic perspective also is crucial as well.
Well, you've never been shy.
Yeah.
Being an independent thinker.
Yes,
you never wanted to go with the herd necessarily.
It depends, yeah. Actually, when I moved into the city, a long time ago, October 85, I was then with Chase, but then moved to Swiss Bank, where I was chief UK economist. And my career, shall we say, was elevating very quickly because I thought the Lawson boom was going to become a crisis. I said the boom is bound to become a bust. And most city economists thought because we were running a budget surplus, it had to be good times. And I was pointing out that we had a big trade deficit, and in particular, private sector liabilities, namely consumer credit, was going through the roof. So it often shows that if you focus on what, for instance, if we move to now budget surpluses, that's the desire. Sometimes if you look at one indicator, that can lead you into full sense of thinking. So it's not about being different to the consensus. The key thing is to try and call it as it is. And if you're part of the consensus, so be it. But if you're not part of consensus, then you need to be really sure about your thoughts, because you will come under lots of sticks.
And your head's over the parapet. Yeah, I've done a bit of that in politics,
that's
so
right.
I know exactly what it's like. And I mean, you could never have imagined, I guess, when you were studying, politics at university, economics at university, that you'd finish up as chief economic advisor to a man like Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
How much does Boris know about economics? We know he's great at classics. How much does he know about economics?
Well, Boris, I always thought, needed to be treated not just as a serious politician as he was, but also as a journalist. And the best way I always felt with Boris was to sit down in a scheduled meeting and to actually talk through the issues. And he's, as we know, a very good writer. And he would pick things up. One of the interesting aspects is that many people used to say he didn't do detail. And that's probably, let's say, true. But what I found is that when I sat down with him in a scheduled meeting, he would actually grasp the detail. So maybe it was because I always made it straightforward, simple to understand. But he did actually get to grips with some of the key economic issues. At that time when I worked with him, it was 2012 to 2016. I basically been chief economist at Standard Chartered, very global, got more and more involved in international public policy, whether through World Economic Forum, Bretton Woods, etc. But then Boris approached me, and at that time I was travelling 5 months of the year. So I thought, having come from London as well, and Boris a very important character, it would be very interesting work. And in terms of coming back to your question, I thought he did grasp the issues when it came to the financial sector. In terms of broader economic issues, look, many politicians don't. I'm not saying that he grasped all the detail, but he was always keen to learn.
But you obviously worked well with him. You see, when he won the election, you know, when he became Prime Minister, he won the election, and, you know, we had, of course, this job coming up for Governor of the Bank of England, and I thought, well, it's bound to be Lyons. He's bound to get the job because Boris knows him and respects him, and, as you said, he listened to you. You know, he actually concentrated from the sounds of it. I mean, wow, you must have a gift with him. But, of course, you were never going to be Governor of the Bank of England because you committed a terrible sin, had you not, in the eyes of the financial establishment. I mean, you backed Brexit. Isn't that what stopped you getting the job?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I certainly was on top of all the issues, that's for sure. But in terms of the... let's take two issues here. The Bank of England, because I think that it is necessary to revisit the Bank of England issue, not in terms of who is governor. It's not just about personalities, it's also process and policy. I think at the bank...
You were excluded because you were a Brexiteer.
Well, I think... No, there are lots of other issues there. I think the Bank of England has an issue with class as well. They're very also Oxbridge-focused. They also do not like diversity of thought.
So you mean Irish Catholic stock didn't quite tick their boxes?
Well, it's not just me saying this. Danny Blanchflower, who is very well-respected former member of the NPC, used to point this out when he was there. But I think it's about diversity of background, diversity of thought in particular. In my view, it doesn't really matter where someone comes from, but diversity of thoughts is vitally important, particularly in terms of the economy. If we take the beginning of last year, for instance, goodness, it was clear that inflation was going to pick up. It was 0.4%. The economy was about to recover as unlocking had taken place post-pandemic. It was the time to actually move away from rock-bottom interest rates. But what is remarkable, often you can't get two economists to agree, but you had 9 economists on the MPC who thought it was appropriate to actually ease policy further. So diversity of thought is vitally important for the future. In terms of the Brexit debates, look, I backed the UK not going into the euro. In fact, the first article I wrote for the Financial Times, dare I say, it was back in 1997, when I pointed out the history of monetary unions globally was that a monetary union of large sovereign nations could only survive if it became a political union. And ultimately, Brexit was about politics, but being outside the euro was also important economically, because one size does not fit all. Greece is not the same as Germany, and as you know, we ran into all sorts of problems when we were shadowing the Deutschmark. Brexit itself is vitally important in a different respect. It's not just the politics, as you know far too well. It's about the economics as well. The global economy is changing. The centre of gravity is moving from transatlantic to trans-Pacific. And if anything, the pandemic has reinforced that. I tend to think the pandemic results in the 3 Gs. Grassroots, green and geopolitics. And the grassroots is moving slightly away from globalisation to more things being done closer at home. But the geopolitics is also vitally important. As we saw with the Ukrainian war starting, we've moved almost to a G3 world. Group 1, America, its allies. Group 2, China, its allies. Group 3, the non-aligned. But superimposed on all of this is the shift to the Indo-Pacific. India in the west to America in the east. And the slowest growing region of the world economy is Western Europe. And the UK, and indeed other countries in Western Europe, needs to reposition themselves. But as I was saying in the referendum, though, it's not easy to leave something you've been in for 40 years. That's why I thought, in economic terms, the analogy I used was a Nike swoosh. We would take a hit, because it's difficult to leave. But it's not just leaving. It's what you do when you leave that's key.
And we've struggled a bit with that. We haven't delivered on many of the reforms that you'd like to see and I'd like to see. And yet we suddenly got Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, and we, for the first time in 3 or 4 decades, got Conservative leaders who said, we will reduce the size of a state, reduce the tax burden, help small businesses. And I'm going, yay! This is fat. I'm particularly with self-employed. I thought this war on self-employed enrages me. And I saw Gerard Lyons' name, that he was, advising Liz Truss and all the rest of it. But this isn't your fault. You actually warned them, didn't you?
Well, I supported Penny Mordaunt in the leadership campaign. Then it got down to the final 2. The Truss camp reached out to me. So I had a phone call with her. about a pro-growth strategy. And then I had 2 meetings with her before she went into Downing Street, 2 meetings that she had. One of them was her chief economic advisor, was with her, plus Kwasi Kwarteng and some other economists. And my view was that it couldn't just be about tax cuts. It couldn't just be about one or two of the other things that were being mentioned at the time. It was very much keep the markets on side. You need to basically recognise that the markets are in a febrile state. And I did warn that, yes, explicitly, that if you did more than what was expected, if you didn't treat the markets carefully by addressing their worries about unfunded tax cuts, about independence of institutions, then yes, there would be a financial crisis. I would say in the parallel universe, if she had just stuck to what was mentioned in the leadership campaign, which was the corporation tax and national insurance taxes being reversed and the energy levy, then things might have been different. Because I had sympathy with her argument that you can't raise taxes going into a global downturn. But I had sympathy with Rishi Sunak's argument that you can't have unfunded tax cuts.
They just did too much too soon, didn't they?
Yes, but we are where we are now, and as we saw today, Rishi performed very well in Parliament, and he basically needs to come back to it. We were saying earlier, reposition the UK in the global picture.
Final thought, Gerard Lyons. The World Economic Forum. Many years ago, you were on one or two of their councils. There are many that are very worried about globalism, about central bank digital currencies. They see the World Economic Forum as being the driving force for removing nation-state democracy. Should we be worried about the WEF?
Well, I'm not sure that we should be worried about the WEF itself, but globalisation is an important feature, and we need to bear in mind that there are global forces that work on the positive, but also maybe sometimes on the negative. The thing about the World Economic Forum, as you said, I've spoken at many of their debates, that post the global financial crisis, I was asked to represent the financial sector in the big debate against sort of Barney Frank from the US Congress, Pascal Lamy and others. So they do provide a forum where you can debate issues.
So you could fight against people that you would disagree with?
Well, but their motto is committed to ensuring that we improve the state of the world. I often used to say that the motto should be changed to committed to ensuring that nothing ever changes. And that's the aspect. So they are very conformist. What we need to make sure we do here in the UK is post-Brexit, have a good relationship with the EU. We need to address our domestic agenda. And coming back to your question about World Economic Forum, is making sure that on the global agenda, we're not only positioning ourselves globally, but we're influencing the global debate, which we can do, given that the UK is the world's 5th, 6th biggest economy. We're still on the... So I don't think we should be diverted by being worried about the World Economic Forum. It's there.
It's a great explanation.
Yeah.
Could talk to you for hours, Gerard Lyons.
Cheers, take care.
Right, we're pretty much done. There's no time for Barrage the Farage because that conversation was too important and too interesting. I'll be back with you live tomorrow from, yes, Uxbridge, Boris Johnson's constituency, the People's Forum. It should be great. Last Week in Deal was a real success. I'll be there. Michelle will be there. See you tomorrow, live at 7. Now, I'm going to hand you over into the capable hands of Mark Stein.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Nigel. And you are quite right about all that globalist, populist stuff. When they say you can't use certain words, it is because they want you to steer away. They're trying to stop you talking about the topic. So he's a populist. He's not a globalist. Globalist, populist, populist, globalist. When they tell you you can't say these words, say them louder. We got lots of great stuff for you. We're going to do a little bit more on the fracking and some of the other strange developments going on in our world. We have a lineup of great guests for you and great topics, and it all starts right after the weather.
Hello, changeable is certainly the theme for our weather through the rest of this week and into the weekend. Tonight remains very mild for just about all of us, breezy conditions, and there is some showery rain heading in our direction. Now, the reason for the changeable setup, low pressure dominating the weather, and these weather fronts swinging in from the southwest as we head through tonight and into the early hours of tomorrow morning. The remnants of this morning's weather front still affecting the far north and northern Isles of Scotland. Meanwhile, the next batch of showery rain pushes in from the southwest through the course of tonight and